this, I shall investigate this fabled blood spring. 2nd of Morningstar, 4th Era, year 201. I was able to obtain passage from Alinor to Solitude by way of ship. No mean feat with this Nord insurrection going on, I assure you. I ran across one of my own in the local tavern, and feared at first that it might cause problems for me. But it turns out that she is well positioned here in the city, and has been happy to help if I keep a civil manner. A quick pause here really quickly. If you are curious, the vampire in Solitude that he speaks of is Sebille Stentor, who I believe is the true puppet master of Skyrim's political system. You can check the video above that I've already done on it if you are interested in finding out more about that. But for now, let's get back to the diary. We spoke much on my research into the Bloodspring, and while she made sure to point out that she thinks it's a soft-headed pursuit, she did say that what she's heard would point to Riften. 5th of First Seed, 4th Era, year 201. After months of searching, I finally may have found a lead. While looking for a bit of dinner in the Villamere Inn, I overheard an old hermit by the name of Jokal talking about strange red water he found bubbling out of the ground. Yes, once I dispose of this soldier, I'll follow to see if I can find this location. Now, the diary does go on further about the blood spring, and that's all very well and good and interesting, but for this video we have read what we need to. So this vampire, Venaris Vulpin, was in Villamere Inn, the very inn in Ivarstead that is run by Wilhelm. Venaris Vulpin also admits to killing someone there. He refers to this person as Dinner. So immediately we're thinking this is our dude, right? Well, while many believe this to be the glove that fits, or in this case, the fangs that fit, there are two major flaws with this theory. Firstly, written right at the end there, it says, and I quote, "While looking for a bit of dinner in the Villamere Inn, I overheard an old hermit by the name of Jokal talking about strange red water he found bubbling out of the ground. Once I dispose of this soldier, I'll follow to see if I can find the location." Venaris Vulpin says he killed a soldier. As far as we know, Rada was not a soldier. All we do know about her is that she went to pick flowers and gather ingredients on the island nearby the township of Ivarstead, and that she then vanished and somehow died. So we actually have no reason at all to believe that this soldier Venaris Vulpin disposed of was in fact Rada. But the true flaw with this theory is timeline. You see, Wilhelm tells us that Rada disappeared over a year ago.
He's been in a state ever since his sister Rada disappeared over a year ago.
This is important because when you start a new character in Skyrim, the game always starts on the same date, the same in-game date, and that is the 17th of Last Seed, year 201 in the 4th Era. We'll use this chart to make it easier to visualize this. So, Last Seed is the 8th month in the year, which consists of 12 months, just like real life, they just have different names. So, if the earliest possible date that we can get this line from Wilhelm is the very same day that we start the game, which is this 17th of Last Seed, year 201 of the 4th Era. That means that Rada at the very least had to have gone missing on the 17th of the Last Seed, year 200 of the 4th Era. Given he says that she went missing over a year ago, it was likely even further back than that. But with this in mind, when we look at Venaris Vulpin's journal entry for when he was at Villamere Inn in Ivarstead and killed the soldier, we can see that it is dated with the 5th of First Seed in the 4th Era, year 201. So this is actually 5 months before the game starts, which would be at minimum 7 months after Rada went missing. So this person that the vampire killed could not have been Rada. And of course, Venaris Vulpin being involved doesn't explain the Iron Arrows, nor does it explain the Dark Brotherhood hit on Nafi. So as cool as this bloodthirsty thread would have been, sadly the calendar just drove a stake through the heart of this vampiric theory. But while we're on the path of weird plots, how about this one? What if Rada faked her own death? Sounds a bit weird. Why would she do that? Well, hear me out. Rada was a young woman trapped within this tiny little town, living with her brother Nafi in the ruined remains of their parents' farmhouse. Perhaps Rhaeda wanted to get the hell out of Ivarstead, which is not an uncommon feeling amongst the townsfolk of the village. As the only other young woman in the town is Fastred, who, much to the disgruntlement of her parents, really wants to leave Ivarstead and explore the big wide world.
Oh, you're a traveler. You must have so much to tell about the world outside this boring town. I can't imagine how exciting it must be to journey from place to place. You're so lucky. I wish I could go with you.
But Fastred feels trapped by the sense of duty of the farm, which is being bared down upon her by her mother Boti and her father Jofthor. Along with this, Temba Widearm, the mill worker, along with Bassianus Axius, are not too fond of Ivarstead either, despite it being their hometown. Well, with this in mind, what if Rhaeda had the same feelings? Not wanting to be trapped in this declining town, not wanting to live with her strange brother in the shattered remains of their deceased parents' homestead, but instead escape and see the world with no strings attached. Well, one way to do this would be to fake your own death. She could have very easily gathered up some bones from Shroudheart Barrow, the Nordic tomb just next to the town of Ivarstead. Within the vestibule, the entryway, even now there are plenty of skeletons and bones ready to be scooped up. Rhaeda could have collected all the parts she needed, placed them in the river, along with her satchel and necklace for someone like us to find, and then conclude that she is in fact dead. I mean, it works, as here we are trying to find out how she died. So if she did do this, well, this ploy of faking her own death is most certainly an effective and convincing one. And to build upon this, another thing that has always rubbed me wrong is the fact that Rhaeda's necklace is found within her satchel. Generally, if you leave the house with your necklace, it is around your neck, not in your satchel. Well, if Rhaeda faked her own death, it actually explains why her necklace can be found within the satchel. It was a clue left behind to, once again, give the conclusion that yes, these remains do in fact belong to Rhaeda because, hey, here is her necklace. When in reality, if you wish to believe it, this was just a clever ruse, in so that Rhaeda could smoke bomb from her former life living in Ivarstead with absolutely no strings attached. She could have placed the iron arrows with the bones she gathered from Shroudheart Barrow again as an indicator of how she supposedly dies. And if we really want to get grim, we could speculate that she called the hit on her brother Nafi as a mercy kill, seeing his descent into madness worsened by her vanishing. Although I would find it more likely that if Rhaeda was aware that Nafi had gone downhill, so to speak, she would just come back and be like, hey, I'm back, everything's okay, oh my god, rather than being like, let me kill him. But regardless of which color you wish to paint it, the overall theory does make sense. But that's not actually as far as it goes. In fact, this is just the beginning. So let's just say that Rhaeda did fake her own death. Where did she go? Well, we know that she used to spend her days collecting flowers, plants, and ingredients and such from the nearby wilderness. And what does one do with alchemy ingredients in Skyrim? That's right, they make potions, or cast spells or perform rituals or something of the sort. So, was Rhaeda an alchemist, or some kind of magic doer, or both perhaps? While it is possible, and I do actually think 100% exactly what's going on here, at this point it might seem a bit baseless. But get this. Rhaeda's brother Nafi, he's a beggar. He has just about nothing to his name. His house has some scraps of food, a little bit of drink, a couple of homewares, he sleeps on the floor, he carries nothing of value, his home is in ruin, he wears ragged robes, he is totally skint. But when we finish the quest to find Rhaeda, as a reward, Nafi will give us 3 alchemical ingredients. But these aren't just any old ingredients, as the alchemy ingredients that Nafi gives us are from a pool of rare alchemy ingredients which consist of Briarheart, Daedraheart, Deathbell, Fire Salts, Frost Salts, Giant's Toe, Hagraven Claw, Hagraven Feathers, Ice Wraith Teeth, Impstool, Jazbay Grapes, Nightshade, Nirnroot, Vampire Dust, and Void Salts. Now, these aren't just random ingredients. They are not common ingredients, nor are they uncommon ingredients. but specifically all of the rare ingredients in the game. Isn't that strange? Now, for those unaware, each alchemy ingredient within Skyrim is tagged as either common, uncommon, or rare. These rarities determine the probabilities of them spawning in alchemy shops or vendors' inventories or as random loot in satchels and such. Now, there is also a fourth category of ingredients which are tagged as no rarity. Now, ingredients that are tagged as no rarity, well, this tag prevents them from spawning as loot or in shopkeepers' wares and stuff like that. This is important because along with the pool of rare alchemy ingredients listed less than a minute ago, Nafi also has a chance to give you a human heart and or human flesh. These are the two ingredients that are tagged as no rarity. This is actually really important because they don't appear in loot pools. So that means that a developer has intentionally added these profane alchemy ingredients to Nafi's already suspicious pool of rare alchemy ingredients. Which brings up an even more grand point. Nafi here, essentially a homeless beggar, skint and poor, has nothing to his name, for whatever reason, has access to all of the rarest alchemy ingredients in the game, most of which are very expensive or very hard to come by, along with him having access to human flesh and human hearts, two alchemy ingredients that are so rare and vile that they have been tagged as having no rarities, that they don't appear in places where they shouldn't, like in a shopkeeper's wares or as a quest reward. Yet, they have been specifically and intentionally added to Nafi's quest loot pool by a developer. I mean, Nafi could have given us anything. He could have given us some common alchemy ingredients, like mountain flowers. He could have given us a book. Maybe he could have given us a family heirloom, a unique item. Maybe he could have become a follower. There are a million options. But no, Nafi, a beggar with no money and nothing to his name, just magically has access to a collection of alchemy ingredients so rare that it would make a Telvanni wizard's tower hard. So, how? Why? Well, I believe that these ingredients that Nafi has to offer as a quest reward actually belonged to his sister Rada, as I have an ever-mounting suspicion that Rada was more than just a simple lass who liked to pick flowers. Imagine, if you will, that Rada was actually, at the very least, an alchemist, and given the exquisite selection of ingredients that Nafi has to offer us as a quest reward, Rada may have been something well beyond a mere alchemist. It might sound a bit wacky, but hold tight, my friend, there's some weird stuff cooking. So firstly, these rare, expensive, and in some cases illegal alchemy ingredients that Nafi specifically has access to have no explanation as to his acquisition of them. The only person with the slightest inkling of an alchemist and or of someone who would have possession of any alchemy ingredients within Ivarstead was Rada, who, as far as the townsfolk were concerned, she traveled off into the wilderness to harvest ingredients. However, when we find Rada's supposed skeleton, we also find her satchel. Now, excluding her unique necklace, Rada's satchel actually has the same loot table as an alchemist's satchel. While the loot is randomized, it's not just a collection of simple local mountain flowers, it contains any range of valuable, rare, obscure, and hard-to-come-by alchemy ingredients. Therefore, it can surmise that Rada was not just an average farm girl who liked to pick petals, but instead she was at the very least well-versed in the understandings of alchemy. Or she was someone who had reason and purpose in collecting these rare ingredients, such as a witch or a sorceress or a druidess or something of that occult ilk. With this concept in mind, if Rada was such an apt alchemist or magic user, then where did she practice these arts? The people of Ivarstead appear to have been unaware of it, for the most part, but we'll get back to that later on when we talk about Wilhelm. But no one mentions that Rada was cooking up potions. No one mentions that she was casting spells. No one mentions that she was doing alchemy and using rare ingredients in the town. All they know is she went into the wilderness to collect ingredients. And within her and Nafi's family home, there is no alchemy table, nor any sign of Kabbalistic art having been performed. And with that said, forget just Nafi's house. The whole town of Ivarstead has literally nothing to do with magic. No enchanting tables, no alchemy tables. There's no wizards or warlocks or alchemists or healers. Nothing. So I'll ask again, where did Raider do her thing? It just doesn't make any sense. Or does it? You see, there is something very curious tucked away within the rift. A small shack. One you yourself may have run across. This is a location known as the Alchemist's Shack. Now before we take a look around, I think that it is very important to note that this is the only unoccupied alchemist shack within the entire game of Skyrim. And where is this shack located, you ask? Well, given the scope of the entire map of Skyrim, this abandoned alchemist's shack just so happens to only be a stone's throw away from Ivarstead. Not only is it in the same hold, the Rift, but its proximity to Ivarstead is, well, quite frankly, suspiciously convenient, let's say. Raider, the only character in Skyrim that I can think of that is known to be a fairly prolific alchemist or magic user, given Nafi's quest rewards and Raider's very own satchel, and she was known for collecting ingredients. You don't do that for nothing. Well, she has no evidence of anywhere in which she would have performed or practiced alchemy. Yet, the, again, only abandoned alchemist shack in the entire game, provincially speaking, is right next to Raider's hometown. That's handy, isn't it? So let's just take the not-so-great leap and imagine that Raider in fact escaped the boring mundanities of Ivarstead and used this very alchemist's shack as a workshop. And while it's not rock solid, I mean, the glove does fit pretty damn well. So what's going on here at this shack? Well, firstly, and most importantly, there is actually an alchemist's table, which we know Raider didn't have access to in Ivarstead, which makes this one right here the closest alchemist's table to Ivarstead, which in turn makes it the most likely one that she would have used. Inside the shack, on the bedside drawers, we can find an alchemist's journal. Let's take a read, shall we? Coming to this area was a brilliant decision. The local flora seems to have many useful properties that I've been able to utilize into new potions. Outside, the rich soil has allowed the cuttings I've collected to grow into fine and bountiful plants. This afternoon, I think I will journey out for more mushrooms as my current supply is beginning to dwindle. On a personal note, I've moved my alchemy work outside the shack. I find the midday air as a boon to my health, as well as inspirational to my work. Now, this alchemist's journal could have been written by Raider. It also could not have been, which is just fine for our investigation, as whether this recluse alchemist that wrote this journal was Raider or not, it doesn't really matter, as Raider still could have used this location as her workshop. I mean, the two of them could have shared it, or maybe Raider found it second, or maybe the alchemist that wrote this journal found this abandoned alchemist's shack after Raider had already died. And because there are no dates within the journal, we have no idea of when it was written. Could have been written yesterday, it could have been written 50 years ago, who knows. Now, there is also a note on the table that I'm sure you spotted, but we'll pay no mind to it as it was added with the Creation Club content, so whether it should be considered canon or not is questionable, and it also just gives us a quest to get a pet rabbit. So regardless of whether it is canon or not, it serves no actual purpose in our hunt for the truth when it comes to Raider and Nafi, so we'll just move straight past the note. Anyway, along with the note and the journal, there is also an apothecary's satchel on the table which will contain common ingredients, which is interesting, as this may have been Raider's, or it may have belonged to an alchemist before her or after her. Regardless, whoever set up this shack was serious enough about alchemy and their art to build/set up this place. So they're a pretty serious alchemist, right? But then their satchel contains just common ingredients, which is just fine, but Raider's satchel contains rare and uncommon ingredients. Point being that Raider has got better, rarer, and more powerful ingredients than someone who loved alchemy so much they set up a whole cabin dedicated to it. Which just even further proves that Raider was a pretty serious collector of ingredients, whether that be for alchemy or magic, or both. Now, if Raider did come and use this place as her alchemy workshop, well, that's great, but what does that mean? Well, she could have been using this place. Sure, it's reasonable. It's got all of the stuff that she did not have access to while living in Ivarstead, namely the alchemist's table, along with the garden of alchemy ingredients, while also being very close to her hometown. So it's totally plausible and I reckon likely. Also, remember that list of exclusively rare and illegal ingredients that Nafi just happened to have at hand to give us as a quest reward, and those that Raider had in her satchel? Well, with this alchemist's shack in the fray, we can start to understand where she might have acquired a fair few of them. As, right next to Raider and Nafi's house in Ivarstead, we can find Nirnroot. There is also Nirnroot right next to the island Raider supposedly frequented to collect ingredients. On this same island, we can find Impstool, and at the alchemist's shack, we can find frost salts, fire salts, more Impstool in the buckets, and outside we can find growing in the garden Jazbay grapes, nightshade, and deathbell. So suddenly we've got 7 of the 15 rare ingredients between Ivarstead, the island, and this alchemist's shack. And while sure it's not a particularly potent tincture, little details like this build up over time into a bigger picture. So Raider could have cooked up potions and honed her skills here and then simply been killed in one of the many ways we have discussed and have yet to discuss. Or she could have faked her own death to escape her life in Ivarstead and set up here. But it raises the question, if she did fake her death to escape, surely she'd be here, right? In her wilderness alchemy shack. So if she's not here, then where did Raider go? Well, let's for a second think about a lone woman living in a remote area who is highly talented in what some would consider an occult art, whether her super rare ingredients be for alchemy or magic. We can rightfully assume that she didn't have these ingredients for no reason, so she was either an alchemist or some kind of magic user. Well, this magic lone woman living in the middle of nowhere in a remote town, she then fakes her own death to escape the mundanities or perhaps even the oppressive aspects of the fringe farm town of Ivarstead. Where would she go? Where would she feel welcome? Who would welcome someone of this description? Well, personally, I think this sounds like a pretty good candidate for some witchy activity. As we know, there are plenty of women, young and old, within Skyrim who align themselves with the Witch's Coven. There are also some witches and even hag-ravens within the Rift. But what is even more curious is that just over the hill to the west of the alchemist's shack, just as we enter Falkreath, there is a location known as Orphan Rock, populated by witches, all female of course, and a hag-raven who is of course also female. It's hard to tell, I know, but trust me. Now this location would be the perfect place for Raider to escape Ivarstead and join her magically inclined sister. As much like the alchemist's shack, this location, Orphan Rock, well, it's conveniently near Ivarstead. In fact, the alchemist's shack is basically smack bang in the middle of Ivarstead and Orphan Rock, if you follow the road, of course. Along with this, here at Orphan Rock, we can find more nightshade growing, and on the table we have more deathbell, along with 2 more rare ingredients, hagraven feathers and a hagraven claw. This potentially explains how Raider, and therefore Nafi, had access to these very rare and very hard to come by ingredients. So Raider may have been coming here during her life, or she may have faked her death and then escaped here, who knows? But things are about to get a lot fishier, literally, as on the rocks just next to the hagraven, we can find a whole lot of blood splattered on the ground along with 2 fish, 1 river betty and 1 silverside perch, both of which are alchemy ingredients. but more importantly, they're out of place. What do I mean by that? Well, good question, but here is a better one. How did these two specific types of fish get here? Might seem like a bit of a silly question, but I assure you it's not. Well, what if Raider brought these fish here as a gift? Perhaps an offering to the almighty Hagrid. Sounds a bit far-fetched, I know, but get this. Here at Orphan Rock, there are no locations nearby in which River Betty or Silverside Perch spawn. So these fish had to come some way to end up here. Now, the 3 nearest locations to Orphan Rock, where we can find not just one of them, but in all 3 of these spots, both the Silverside Perch and the River Betty spawn together in all 3 of these locations. And well, guess where the 3 nearest spots to Orphan Rock are, where we can find not only either, but both River Betty and Silverside Perch? Well, it's right here, in this little stream. This little stream that is quite literally next to Nafi and Raider's house. The next closest spot is right here next to Ivarstead, where the water current diverges, and the third closest spot is here in Lake Gear, right next to the island in which Raider frequently visited to collect ingredients. Very interesting. I'll say it again, the 3 most nearby locations from Orphan Rock where we can find both of these fish are all at the exact spots that Raider spent her entire life visited to collect ingredients, her hometown of Ivarstead, and literally next to her front door. So to base things purely on proximity, it makes sense that this is where these fish would have come from. And alright, let's think. Do we know anyone who spent their time at all 3 of these locations, but was also known to collect ingredients? And also someone who had potential reasons to visit Orphan Rock and the Witches and make an offering to the Hagraven? Yeah, we do. Her name's Raider. Now, of course, this theory, along with all the others, could not be true at all. But if we did want to run with it, we could surmise that Raider either did or didn't use the alchemy shack. She may have been the one to set it up. Maybe she's the one who found it after another alchemist had set it up. Maybe she didn't use it at all. Regardless of this, Raider still could have very well come to convene with the Hagravens and Witches of Orphan Rock to make them an offering, which would raise the alarming eyebrow of why are these fish covered in huge amounts of blood? Is it from the fish? It's an awful lot of blood for some tiny little fish. Or did whoever brought these fish here as an offering get absolutely destroyed by the Hagraven? Perhaps that is how Raider died and met her end. I mean, it's possible, but I personally think the most likely string of events in regards to this whole theory is that Raider used the I also find it relatively easy to convene with the Witches and Hagraven of Orphan Rock, but I do truly believe that the skeleton we find in the someone in the township of Ivarstead learned of Raider's witchy escapades and let's get some other popular theories talked about before we start pointing fingers at the innkeeper. Let's start with some easy ones and cover the theories that seem to always pop up among the Elder Scrolls community when discussing the ever-grand and unsolved mystery of Raider and Nafi. After all, this is aimed at equipping you with as much information as possible. And honestly, who knows what's true? There are definitely some theories that have way more evidence and way more psychological reasoning behind them, but nothing's concrete. So it's important to talk about everything so that we, together, can discuss what really happened here. Firstly, a fan favorite, a plot twist. Nafi did it. Nafi is, as we have established clearly, a madman. He speaks in third person and says strange things that don't quite make sense. He also appears to be somewhat of a drunkard.
I'll live to drink another day.
His speech is kind of slurred and altered somewhat in the same way that being intoxicated would affect one's speech. We can find ale on his body, we can find some bottles of alcoholic beverages around the house, and see him gulping from his tankard. A perpetually drunk man who's got a few screws loose, killing his sister in some kind of intentional or even perhaps accidental fit of violence is possible. The idea being that the mental trauma of performing sororicide, that being killing one's sister, such an abhorrent, twisted deed of physical and psychological brutality made Nafi crack. It broke him. Just as an automatic survival response, his mental state was filled with barriers that prevent him from actually remembering what he did. That's why he lolls about, yelling out Raida's name. He's waiting for her. He doesn't remember what he did. He loves her. It's his sister. He was the only person who was ever nice to him. Yet, somehow, for some reason, he killed her, and his mental state crumbled. As Wilhelm states,
he's been in a state ever since his sister Rada disappeared over a year ago.
Nafi has been in a state since his sister disappeared. So while he could have been a complete nutter before she disappeared, he also could not have been. He could have been a normal dude that's just undergone so much trauma and stress from the disappearance of his sister that he's kind of devolved into this muttering fool. Regardless, Raida's disappearance has put him, and I quote, into a state of muddled insanity. But if we do want to run with this Nafi theory, we can say that he kills Raida for whatever reason, but then he doesn't remember. The damage is done, he has subconsciously blocked it out, and his brain carries the scars and walls to prevent him from knowing his own dark deed. Don't forget, the quest is called The Straw That Broke. That straw is Nafi's mind, and this video is the straw that broke this camel's back. Anyway, Nafi also says this, which, by the way, he says before we've even met him, let alone before he knows that his sister is dead.
Oh, Raida, you live among the clouds now, dear Raida.
You live among the clouds now, dear Raida? You live among the clouds now. That sure sounds like Nafi knows that Raida is dead. Normally when referencing someone, the phrase in the clouds means they aren't thinking straight. They're off with the pixies, they're frolicking with the fairies, they're daydreaming, they're not quite in the present. However, in this case, Nafi says that Raida lives in the clouds now, which sure seems to imply that she is in some kind of afterlife. I mean, even just beyond the real-life sentiment of heaven being in the clouds, we can look at Sovngarde, the Nordic afterlife here in Skyrim, and it's up in the stars, in the clouds. Well, it's actually literally in the stars, as Sovngarde is in Aetherius, the light from which shines through holes in the firmament, and that is what we see as stars on Mundus within the Elder Scrolls games. But we will actually talk more on that much later on for a totally different reason. Anyway, point being that yes, in the Elder Scrolls, much like here on planet Earth, we look up to the stars, we see the sky, the clouds, heaven's up there. In the case of the Elder Scrolls, heaven is literally up there, beyond the stars. And that's important because it means that when Nafi says, you live among the clouds now, dear Raida, that contextually, yes, it makes total sense that he is saying that she's dead, which again is very odd because he says this before we've even met him. Which is of course before we tell him that she is dead. So he shouldn't know that she's dead, yet somehow seems to? Or is he just a madman saying mad things? I don't know, but it's suspicious. Well, it actually might be explained by the mad god Sheogorath, which sounds so silly and so cheap, I know. Ooh, a crazy man. Must be the doings of Sheogorath, but I assure you, there is some very weird stuff going on here in Ivarstead, and don't forget, I've been making this video for 4 months, and it led to Sheogorath. But sit tight though, as we will get to that unholy, gnarled chain of discussion much later on. Anyway, apart from this single line about Raida living in the clouds now, I really don't see any discernible motive or reason or evidence as to why Nafi would want to kill his sister. Nafi also does not own any arrows or a bow, so the whole iron arrows thing doesn't add up with Nafi in the mix. It's also proven in both word and action that Nafi is actually harmless. Nafi says this about himself.
Oh no, please, I never harmed no one.
And Wilhelm says this about Nafi.
He's harmless.
So the consensus around town is that Nafi is in fact harmless, and to set this claim in stone, when we go to assassinate Nafi for the Dark Brotherhood mission, as we are literally killing him, he just cowers in fear. And do not forget that Nafi is armed with a dagger, but he never draws it. He does not protect himself from death. He does not fight back, even when we are trying to kill him. So again, Nafi is proven to be harmless in both word and action, making it, of course, even less likely that Nafi was the one to kill his sister Rada. Now, Nafi also references saying goodbye to his mother and his father, but he never got the chance to say goodbye to Rada.
Rada! You saw Rada? Did you tell her Narfi cries? Did you tell her Narfi never said goodbye like mother and father?
This clearly implies to me that Nafi was not there when Rada died. Some have taken this line as meaning that Nafi did kill his parents. You know, goodbye mother and father, stab stab, and is therefore a psychopath. And therefore, he also killed his sister. But I see no reason to believe he killed his parents purely on narrative, motive, and evidence. And even if Nafi did kill his parents, he said goodbye to them. So if he didn't get to say goodbye to Rada, well, that just confirms that he didn't kill Rada. Because if he did kill her, then he would have had the chance to say goodbye. So personally, I don't subscribe to this particular thread of evidence, but you should subscribe to this channel. And while we are on the topic of Nafi's parents, let's talk about their old farmhouse. I often see in discussions within the Elder Scrolls community that Nafi's family house was burnt down. There is a bunch of theories that stem from this, but we are not going to go into these because, well, I don't follow this one either, but you should follow me on Twitter, as there is no sign of a fire. All the wood and thatch is broken. It's crumbling, it's unmaintained. Yes, the house is a pile of garbage, but there's no ash, there's no cinder, there's no charmer, there's no black burnt wood. So we actually have no reason at all to believe that Nafi's family home burnt down. My best guess is that Nafi's house was pummeled by an avalanche, or rock slide, or something of the sort, stuff falling off the mountain, likely killing his parents in the process. If we look at where Nafi's house is situated, it's right at the base of a very steep cliff that leads up and up and up to the blizzard-battered throat of the worlds. And next to what remains of Nafi's house, there is also a perfect ravine for rocks and snow to slide down and be funneled precisely on top of his home. Now, given there are no giant rocks inside Nafi's house, and the wooden floor is intact, I would put my money on a snow slide over a rock slide. Snow slide, the weight of the snow can make the roof cave in and stuff, but if big boulders were coming down, like, the house would be gone. To confirm this idea, within the Elder Scrolls Online, this same area, at the base of the 7,000 steps, right next to where Nafi's abode is, the path to High Hrothgar is actually closed off due to a massive avalanche that swept down the mountainside, rent trees from their roots, and swept boulders away in the process, and completely buried the 7,000 steps in snow and ice and debris. So not only could an avalanche happen in theory, but we know for a fact that they not only occur, but occur at the very spot that Nafi's house is below. And again, the geographical layout and position of Nafi's home make it the perfect bullseye for an avalanche coming down the mountain on this side. Now remember when Nafi says this,
The mountain will eat you. Watch the mountain.
At first, it seems weird and to have no meaning, but when we pair this line of dialogue with the idea that Nafi and Rada lost their parents and their home to an avalanche cascading down the mountainside, suddenly that line of dialogue makes a hell of a lot of sense. It's also worth noting that Nafi can be found mining this stone at the base of the mountain next to the hovel. Given the state of the homestead, we can deduce that Nafi clearly is not using the quarried stone to rebuild his house, nor is he selling the stone as he's broke. So is this act of mining some kind of strange catharsis? Like a ritual of revenge for Nafi. He's causing damage to the mountain that ate his family, as Nafi so literarily puts it. Although, to be fair, he could also be saying the mountain will eat you, because over the years he has watched pilgrims go up the 7,000 steps and never return. But the fact that he also says to watch the mountain will eat you, that seems to me much more inclined to be a warning about avalanches rather than a warning about he saw some pilgrims take a hike. So I believe that Nafi's parents were killed in a natural disaster and his family home was destroyed in the process. This does make the most sense given the aforementioned evidence. Now, all of what I just said could also not be true, but to be honest, there is literally no evidence to formulate any other theory to do with the death of Nafi's parents or how his family home got destroyed. Therefore, it's the only theory we have, so it's the one I'm running with. So whether you believe it or not, this theory that Nafi was in fact the one that killed his sister Rada then leads to the idea that someone in the township saw him do it. Said witness then contacted the Dark Brotherhood to get rid of this now mad murderer Nafi. But if you saw Nafi kill his sister Rada, surely you just tell the guards immediately. Why wait a whole year to then dish out 750 gold and pay for his assassination when it could have been sorted out for free straight away by the guards? Just doesn't add up. So overall, I am personally not at all sold on the concept that Nafi is Rada's murderer. In fact, I am certain he is innocent of the crime. And there is one last theory in regards to Nafi being the one who killed his sister Rada. It is a theory that I've seen online a few times and one I personally don't buy, but the theory is that Nafi is a werewolf. That's why he lives alone on the other side of town. He lives in tattered clothes, just like werewolves do, and his house is a mess, which could potentially be the result of a werewolf just going, nuts in a house and smashing the walls down. So the idea is that Nafi turned into a werewolf, he slaughtered his sister, and when he came to, he had no memory of it. As cool as that plot twist would be, I'm a sucker for evidence, as everyone should be. And when it comes to evidence, this werewolf theory seems to be entirely based off of this single line of dialogue.
If you see Rada, tell her that Narfi misses her and to come home soon. Very soon. Soon. Soon like the moon.
I will admit that I have no good explanation for it other than Nafi's just a nutty guy saying nutty things. And for all of our sakes, I did check in the creation kit and I can confirm that Nafi is in fact not a furry, I mean a werewolf. He's just a plain old human. And don't you think that someone in town would have noticed a werewolf running around Nafi's house every full moon, or noticed a werewolf running through town and murdering someone? And also, werewolves don't murder people with arrows. So the iron arrows go unexplained as well. So not only is there no evidence for this theory, but there is also several things that make it impossible. Anyway, in conclusion, we don't actually have any solid in-game reason to believe that Nafi killed his sister Rada, apart from this one throwaway line.
Oh, Rada, you live among the clouds now, dear Rada.
And I will be the first to admit, it's a suspicious piece of dialogue to be sure. How the hell does he know that his sister's dead? But as suspicious as it is, that one piece of dialogue cannot hold back the tide of reasons as to why Nafi appears to be completely innocent of his sister's murder. And as I think I mentioned earlier, the fact that Nafi knows about Rada's death before we tell him that she's dead, there is actually an explanation for this, but you'll have to hold tight for that one as it is very deep in a very weird rabbit hole that we're going to get to later on. But while we are talking about the mad lad Nafi, let's take a look at the standalone reasons as to why someone would want him killed, the potential reasons. Leaving the death of his sister Rada to the side for now. So when we first encounter Nafi, he will say this:
I don't owe you money, do I?
Now, of course, he is a beggar that lives in squalor, so taking donations from the good-willed public is to be expected. But Nafi uses the term debt. Interesting. This is an important distinction. As an example, let's just say that you are walking down the street and you see a homeless person sitting there asking for money. Out of the goodwill and charity of your own heart, you decide to give them $10. A week goes by, you're walking down the same street, you see that homeless person again. They don't give you the money back, nor is that expected. It was a donation, not a repayable fund. So while Nafi is a beggar and accepts generous donations from other people, the fact that Nafi even brings up debt means that he is in debt to someone, if not many people. Now, when someone owes you money and they don't pay you back, that is really damn annoying. It's also rude and extremely disrespectful. But would it be enough to push someone so far as to call for his assassination? That is pretty extreme. It's possible, but extreme, even within a fantasy universe like the Elder Scrolls. The major flaw here is that if Nafi did owe someone money, why would that person pay even more money to have him killed? One, you're obviously losing even more gold, but if you kill the guy that owes you money, that's a surefire way to never get back the money that they owed you in the first place. So dishing out 750 extra septims to 100% guarantee that you will never see your money ever again? No. Yeah, nah, that just does not make any sense to me at all. Now, what if Nafi was a burglar? As when we kill Nafi, we can see in his inventory that he actually carries a lockpick. I did check in the creation kit and he'll always carry this on him. So Nafi, for some reason, has a lockpick. Well, what do you use lockpicks for? That's right, picking locks. Now in the town of Ivarstead, the only locks to be picked are the front doors of people's houses. Given Nafi's bankruptcy and near state of homelessness, it's entirely within the realm of reason to formulate a theory that Nafi has been sneaking around town and trying to break into people's houses, possibly for riches, but honestly probably just to keep himself fed. Don't forget, Nazir says this.
Congratulations. You slaughtered an emaciated beggar in cold blood. You are truly an opponent to be feared. Here's your payment.
He uses the word emaciated, of course meaning abnormally thin or weak, especially due to illness or a lack of food. So poor old Nafi having to skulk around and try to steal food from the other townsfolk just to feed himself, it is a likely explanation for the lockpick that is always found in his inventory. With this in mind, tampering with people's homes and private possessions is a sure way to drum up grudges with the local folk. So Nafi may have been caught or even just spotted during the act and gained the unending fury of one of Ivarstead's residents. It might seem extreme, but imagine if you kept seeing your neighbor trying to break into your home. You'd be pretty fumed, right? And I mean, hey, even in real life, depending on which country you live in, you could be within your legal rights to kill someone that you see trying to break into your home. That's how much such an activity pisses people off. So now we take that emotion and add it into a fantasy world in which paying for an assassination is more everyday than it is in real life, I hope. Well, this could be the reason that someone wanted Nafi killed. It's totally within the bounds of possibility. And speaking of this, who owns the only two homes in Ivarstead with locked doors? That would be Klimek, the fisherman and Uber Eats delivery boy for the Greybeards, and Jofthor, who owns Fellstar Farm, both of which have some suspicious qualities specifically when it comes to Nafi. Firstly, Klimek. He seems like a pretty normal bloke, but weirdly, for most of the day, he just stands on the opposite side of the river from Nafi's house and stares for like 8 hours every day. Pretty weird, right? Why is he staring at Nafi? Well, Klimek is supposed to be a fisherman. That's what he's labeled as. That's his job in town. He fishes. But when Skyrim released in 2011, there was no fishing animation in the game. So is this idle blank staring into the abyss next to the river, death gazing over at Nafi, is this meant to be Klimek fishing? Him just standing near water? I think it is meant to be that, but also the devs could have at least put a fishing rod or some fish on the shoreline to imply that this is a fishing spot, a stool, anything. Because there are other locations all throughout Skyrim that have been here since launch, since 2011, since the base game, where an NPC is a fisherman or fisherwoman, and to tell that story, the developers put stuff around them, like a rack of fish or again a fishing rod, whatever it is. It's environmental storytelling that lets us know they be fishing. So the devs could have definitely done a better job of letting us know that yes, Klimek is in fact fishing when he stands here. Because what we actually ended up with in-game is just really creepy. He stands still for 8 hours, eyeing a madman across the river. Anyway, that's Klimek's death-staring theory. There is no other evidence he has ill will towards Na'vi, and no evidence that he had an attraction to Raider either. So apart from the weird death staring, which we can explain as a lack of animation / lack of developer storytelling, we don't have anything to point towards why Klimek would actively be standing here for 8 hours every day giving Na'vi the evil eye. But let's now talk about Jofthor. This is a little more esoteric, but very, very odd and interesting. Everything Jofthor does and says is nothing too interesting, although he does seem to be extremely protective of his daughter Fastrid. She wants to go and see the world, and Jofthor is pulling the classic overprotective dad moves to make sure she stays safe, aka never leaves the farm. Now, no one in the entire game of Skyrim mentions Raider except for Na'vi and Wilhelm. And no one in the entire game mentions Na'vi except for Nazir and Wilhelm, which makes this next discovery very strange indeed. When you interact with Jofthor, the game runs a unique script when you speak to him. It checks whether his daughter Fastrid is dead. If she is dead, then this will be the scripting gateway for Jofthor to respond with a line of dialogue like, "Oh, my poor daughter Fastrid's gone, I miss her, blah 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 blah," something like that. This makes sense, total sense. There's plenty of characters that have scripts like this. However, this script that runs when you say hello to Jofthor not only checks if Fastrid is dead, but it also checks if Na'vi is dead. Now, this script doesn't actually do anything. It doesn't change Jofthor's responses or open new dialogue. And because of this piece of script was flagged as a bug and removed with the unofficial patch. What is interesting is that in this section of bug fixes for the unofficial patch, every other response is flagged as no longer appropriate. These no longer appropriate responses are things like you do a quest where you run into someone and they say, "Oh my god, one day I hope I get my very own sword." And then you do the quest and you get them a sword. You run into them again and they say, "Oh my god, I hope that one day I get my very own sword." It's like, no, I did the quest. You do have your own sword. Things like that are dialogue responses or checks that are no longer appropriate. But this line of script that Jofthor has to check if Na'vi is dead is the only one in this entire list that is flagged as unnecessary conditions, making it unique in the fact that it's not actually a bug. It is unnecessary, but it's not a bug. It just doesn't serve a purpose in the version of Skyrim that was released. This, to me, implies that there were bigger plans for the Na'vi story, obviously involving Fastrid and Jofthor potentially. I mean, this piece of script, it didn't write itself. A developer added this, and for a reason that appears to have never fully formed. Sadly, I don't think we can take anything away from this other than there were once bigger plans for Na'vi's story that never made it into the final version of the game. Cut and unfinished content in Skyrim? Unheard of. I would love to hear what you think these bigger plans could have been. A love situation, perhaps? I guess we'll never truly know what Bethesda had planned for Na'vi, unless one of Skyrim's developers who knows about this is watching this. Hello, I would like to talk to you, please. So, as far as standalone reasons for someone wanting Na'vi killed, we have the two more plausible options, which is he owed someone money, and that he was caught trying to break into someone's house, both of which just lead to they had a grudge against him and wanted him gone. And along with these, we have the two weirder occurrences, the first of which is Klimek staring at Na'vi for 8 hours every day, and the other one is the aforementioned legacy code that makes Jofthor check if his daughter Fastrid is dead, along with checking if Na'vi is dead. I would love to hear if you have any other reasons that you can conjure up as to why someone would want to assassinate Na'vi. But after months of digging and literally 4 months of working on this video, these are the only reasons I can conjure based on in-game evidence. And even then, these theories are lukewarm compared to the coming up. So, with Nafi out of the way, no pun intended, but it's welcome, let's take a look at Wilhelm. And if you think any of the stuff we've talked about so far is weird, you haven't seen anything yet. As trust me, this Elder Scrolls detective found some very wacky stuff. So, as we know, Wilhelm is the chap who runs the tavern here in Ivarstead, the Villemere Inn. Along with this, besides Nazir of the Dark Brotherhood, Wilhelm is the only NPC in the game that mentions Nafi. And besides Nafi, Wilhelm is the only NPC in the game that mentions Raider. So clearly he's got an ear for gossip and the goings-ons of the town. But because he's the prime source of information, this also makes him the hottest potato to take a good look at, while we attempt to unravel what the hell is actually going on around here. So let's just run through Wilhelm's dialogue again, as so we don't miss a beat here, and also so we can poke holes in everything he says. Wilhelm, what's the story with Nafi?
He's harmless. He's been in a state ever since his sister Rada disappeared over a year ago. He just keeps to himself in what's left of his folks' farmhouse across the river.
But you told Nafi she'd come back.
I just said that to make the poor guy feel better. I'm pretty sure she's dead. Rada would gather ingredients from the small island in the river east of here. Then one day, she just vanished. I tried to look for her, but she never turned up.
Tell me, is there anything dangerous on that small island to the east?
I've seen some sort of a cave entrance over there. Folks call it Fireman's Hall, but I don't know why. Probably best if you avoid it for now. It didn't seem to do Rada any good.
So Wilhelm told Nafi that his sister Rada was coming back just as a tool of comfort. And you know what? Sure, that is a fair reason to say such a thing. But this comfort he gives to Nafi could also stem from two places of guilt. Either Wilhelm feels guilty that he was involved in Rada's end, and he feels bad because his actions have led to the mental down spiral of Nafi. As he says, Nafi has been in a state ever since Rada disappeared. He then follows this up by saying that he's pretty sure she's dead, which, again, I mean, sure, that's a reasonable conclusion when a girl has vanished for over a year, but it could also mean that he knows she's dead. He also mentions the island where Rada would go and gather ingredients, which we'll take a look at in a minute, don't you worry. But Wilhelm says that he tried to look for her, but she never turned up. And he could have done. He might be genuine, but this could also be a deflection from his guilt. In an attempt to appear as the only one who tried to help out, subtly painting himself in our subconscious as a good guy. He's the good guy in this situation. Oh, Wilhelm, he's a good guy. He tried to help and look for Rada. Oh, Wilhelm, he's the good guy. He says Nafi's harmless. Now again, Wilhelm could be totally genuine, or Wilhelm could be pulling some 200 IQ moves to trick us without us even noticing. On top of this, if Wilhelm did try and look for Rada, he sure as hell didn't do a very good job. Her corpse is literally right next to the town, in shallow water. Her skeleton is found like 15 meters from the front door of the Villemere Inn. So instantly, this laughable proximity is suspicious, and it makes the fact that Wilhelm looked for her even more suspicious. How did he not find her? Or did he find her but lies to us? Or did he actively not find her? Or is he lying and did not look at all? Or did he look, didn't find her, and he's being totally honest? I'm not sure, but I will say that my spidey senses of something's up are definitely tingling. Wilhelm then mentions again the island where Rada gathered ingredients, a place called Gehrman's Hall. Wilhelm then tells us to avoid it, as it didn't seem to do Rada any good, insinuating that something on the island killed her. Again, this could be an honest opinion of Wilhelm's, or it could be a tactical deflection from what he actually knows happened to Rada. Anyway, let's put this island thing to bed once and for all. So what is on this island? What is Gehrman's Hall? Well, as we know, the island has some decent ingredients on it. That's why Rada used to come here in the first place. But just as Wilhelm does say, there is a cave here. As soon as we enter it, we will be greeted by a fairly well-sized cavern. There is a dead adventurer who appears to have been killed by the group of skeevers here. Next to them is a giant hole in the floor that leads down deep into Nirn, where we will find the Nordic tomb of Geirmund's Hall. And yes, while it is filled with Draugr, the Nordic undead of old, one, they have no way of actually getting out to where Raider would have been, and two, they don't use iron arrows. The Draugr use ancient Nord arrows. And despite all of this, as we established towards the beginning of the video, by the laws of hydrophysics, Raider could not have been killed on the island. If she had been, her body would have floated east away from Ivarstead. Raider has to have entered the water or have been killed within this green section that we spoke of earlier. It's the only possible way that her corpse could have ended up where it did. So, Wilhelm's explanation of something on this island having killed Raider is simply just plain impossible, and therefore, whether it be intentional or accidental, it's just incorrect. Now, before we delve into the depths of what Wilhelm has to offer, I'd like to quickly brush over some very common theories that people have about Wilhelm in regards to Raider/Na'vi. Along with a theory of my own, but admittedly, it's rather decaf. It's not my strongest brew. But as I keep saying, I don't want to leave anything unexplored here. This video is for you, and so we can have a discussion about this. So I don't want to leave anything unsaid. So firstly, for whatever reason, within the Elder Scrolls community, I often see discussed the notion that Wilhelm was in love with Raider, and he either killed her out of some kind of jealousy or wanted Na'vi dead because he thinks that Na'vi hurt her, something along those lines. Such a theory is just fine, but I've never seen any actual evidence to suggest that this is what happened, nor was I able to find any in the 4 months that I spent working on this video. So the conclusion of that is, of course, I don't think that this theory is true, and there's no reason to believe it is. There is also another thread of thought that Wilhelm called the hit on Na'vi as a mercy kill, to put him out of his misery, essentially. Again, they are both plausible within the rules of the universe, but none of them have any, tangible in-game evidence to suggest they even exist. Although, with that said, Wilhelm may have called to have Na'vi assassinated, but the reason for that, well, we'll get to that much later, as there's much more to uncover for that to make any sense at this point. But secondly is my theory, which isn't great, but it's worth mentioning, as maybe you can work it into the grand picture somehow. So, as we know, Wilhelm runs the Villemere Inn, and he says himself that he struggles to get business as Ivarstead is a small fringe township, especially now with the dragons and the Civil War. You know, those two things don't exactly encourage folk to travel around the outskirts of civilization, i.e. pass through Ivarstead. But what if there were 2 inns in Ivarstead? Well, Wilhelm might have had motivation to put this other inn out of business. Maybe it's possible. What am I talking about? Good question. So, within the Elder Scrolls Online, which is set roughly 1,000 years before the Elder Scrolls V Skyrim takes place, we can visit the Rift, and we can even make a visit to the town of Ivarstead. Well, the very same building that is Villemere Inn in Skyrim is actually known as the Hawker's Tusk Tavern here in ESO, 1,000 years prior. But do you know what else is here? A building. A building in the exact same spot as Na'vi's house is in Skyrim. Now, this structure here in ESO is much bigger. It's much grander than the squalor we find in Skyrim. But this isn't just any old house. Oh no, this is actually a second inn/tavern called the Pilgrim's Rest Inn. Now, I will say I can find no connection between any of the people living in Ivarstead in ESO and those who live in Ivarstead in Skyrim. The only correlations are that where Villemere Inn is, there's a tavern, and where Na'vi's house is, there's an inn. Well, with these 2 inns in mind, what if Na'vi's parents ran the second inn in Ivarstead, and Wilhelm saw this as competition to his business? So he sought to destroy their tavern to save his own inn. How did he do this? I don't know, caused an avalanche? Killed Raider? has now called to hit on Narfi, is trying to get rid of the whole family to ensure that his inn never has in-town competition. Well, it is possible, but much like some of the other theories we spoke of earlier, there's no actual evidence for any of this. But I did want to tell you it because I thought it was an interesting enough piece of information that just appears to not fit anywhere. So again, maybe you're smart enough to work it in somewhere and make it fit the bigger picture. So now, with some of the mundanities out of the way, let's properly dig into Wilhelm. So sometimes, when we wander into Villemere Inn, we can overhear Wilhelm talking to his bard, Linley Starsong.
Steve, I saw it again. That ghost. It was over by the barrows.
That thing's evil, Linley. I told you to keep away from there.
I'm sorry. I was curious. I didn't believe the stories. I won't go over there ever again.
See that you don't. I promise to keep you safe. I'm not going to break my word.
Huh, interesting. Let's press this path of intrigue further.
If I were you, I'd keep away from the barrow on the east side of town. It's haunted.
Tell me more about this barrow.
There ain't much more to tell. They're haunted, and you should stay away. Look, I've seen one of the spirits with my very own eyes. When it glared at me, I swear it burned right through my soul.
Do the spirits haunt your town as well?
Fortunately, they seem to be sticking to the barrow. I think they're guarding it. Certainly isn't helping my business any. Who'd want to rent a room anywhere near a haunted barrow?
Well, I could investigate this for you.
If you think there's anything you can do, be my guest.
Has anyone ever explored the barrow before?
About a year or two ago, some fella named Wendelius came through. Said he was some kind of a treasure hunter. I warned him not to go in there, just like I warned you. The very next night, we heard screams from the barrow, and that was it. We never saw him again.
Very curious. A ghost next to the town. Unexplained screams in the night, and a man named Wendelius, who, even more curiously, arrived in Ivarstead a year or two ago, went into the barrow, and has not been seen since. This is very interesting, as Raider went missing over a year ago. Now, technically, over a year ago could range from anything from 1 year ago to infinite time ago. But within the acceptable parameters of the English language, the phrase over a year ago means more than 1 year ago, but less than 2 years ago. If Raider had been missing for longer, then you'd say she went missing over 2 years ago, or over 3 years ago, etc, etc. So it would seem that within the same rough time frame that Raider went missing, well, it's the same rough time frame in which Wendelius arrived in Ivarstead. And don't forget, Wilhelm said that he heard screams. So this hits far too close to home for us to not investigate this matter further. So naturally, we'll be heading into Shroud Half Barrow, which, as we've established at this point, is literally right next to the town of Ivarstead. Inside the vestibule, we'll find plenty of skeletons, the very same ones that Raider could have used to fake her death that we took a look at earlier. But they are of no matter at present. As we descend into this haunting lair, we will hear a voice.
Leave this place. Leave this place. Leave.
The ghost of Wendelius warning us to leave this place. Naturally, we will do just the opposite. When we do push on further, Wendelius will actually begin attacking us. Whereupon, unlike Narfi, we will actually fight him back. And with a few good swings, we kill this not ghost of Wendelius? Oh, seems that killing him had the opposite effect it normally has on people. He went from ghost to man and not the other way. And tell you, some of these elves are built different apparently. Weird, but okay. Now, when we search his body within his inventory, we will find something very interesting. A filter of the Phantom, which has the effect of making one appear spectral for 30 seconds. Aha! This would explain why he looked ghostly, yet was in fact just a man. So if you are bad at communicating with people, this potion will most certainly assist you in becoming more transparent. But with Wendelius out of the way, just a little further into the ruin, we will discover the chambers in which Wendelius had made his home. On the ancient stone table, we can find his journal. Let's take a read and see if we can find anything that assists us in getting to the bottom of what happened to Raider. 4th Era, Year 200, 18 Morning Star. I've set up camp inside the barrow. This has to be the place. According to all of my research, the burial chamber should be located here. All I need is some time undisturbed to find the claw. It must be hidden here somewhere. 4th Era, Year 200, the 25th Morning Star. Had a close call today with that fool Wilhelm. He came close to entering the barrow, but I was able to scare him off by rattling some pottery shards in a bag. These people are far too superstitious for their own good. Gives me an idea. 4th Era, Year 228th of Morningstar. After a few failures, I've come up with a mixture that should do the trick. The glow is perfect. I should look exactly like one of those supposed spirits the people of Ivarstead believe is haunting this barrow. Going to test it out tomorrow. 4th Era, Year 229th Morningstar. Success. It worked better than I could have imagined. All I had to do was wander about the entrance to the barrow at night and wave my arms about. I had to stop myself from laughing aloud as they ran away. This should keep them at bay while I continue my search for the claw. 4th Era, Year 200, 11th of Hearthfire. Almost half a year has passed and there's no sign of the claw or any clues to its whereabouts. This is becoming maddening. It has to be here. Can't risk hiring any assistance, so I'll have to continue alone. 4th Era, Year 220, Sun's Dusk. It isn't here. It can't be here. This isn't right. It must be the people of Ivarstead. They must be onto my ruse, and they're toying with me. They want to find the burial chamber on their own, and keep the riches for themselves. 4th Era, Year 200, 18th of Evening Star. Why are they tormenting me? Why don't they just destroy me? Who am I? My head's becoming clouded. I can't remember anything. I have to read my journal to remember my purpose. Am I a part of this tomb? Am I meant to guard it? What's becoming of me? 1st Era, Year 1050. They shall not take my treasure. They shall all pay dearly for their crimes. Any who set foot within these walls will taste my wrath, my power. I am the guardian of Shroudhearth Barrow. All who oppose me will fall. I don't know if anyone knows who Ziltoid is, but it sounded a lot like Ziltoid there. Wow, what a journey. So, Wendelius came to Shroudhearth Barrow in search of treasures. In particular, the Sapphire Dragon Claw, which is nowhere to be seen. But if acquired, it will open up the vaults of this ancient Nordic tomb that are otherwise impassable. Not only that, but importantly, Wendelius did not find it, which ultimately led to his descent into madness or possession. We will take a deeper look into the possibility of the possession thing in a minute, as that last journal entry is pretty wacky. Anyway, he came here to find the Sapphire Dragonclaw, set up camp in the barrow. Interestingly, he mentions that Wilhelm was trying to enter the barrow, or at least see what was going on in there, but he was able to scare him off by rattling some pottery. But I've got a few questions, one of which is why was Wilhelm skulking around the barrow in the first place? Was he trying to see if Wendelius was alright? I mean, if we think about it, as far as Wilhelm was aware, Wendelius arrived in town, went into the barrow, and never came out. So perhaps Wilhelm was having a little sticky beak to try and see what was going on in there, see if Wendelius was okay. That is possible. Or was Wilhelm knocking about the barrow because he wanted something from within it? Or was Wilhelm doing something else, like meeting someone outside the barrow? Well, there might be a good reason for Wilhelm being outside. We'll touch on that soon enough when we get to his shopkeeper friend. But for now, Wendelius. He pulls a galaxy brain move to prevent, or perhaps even better mitigate, the issue of nosy townsfolk. So he whips up this little concoction, the Filter of the Phantom, as to make himself appear as a ghost and frighten the people of Ivarstead. And it worked very well for a time, as it evidently had some long-term drawbacks. Then, as Wendelius slowly spiraled into a torturous mental abyss, believing the people of Ivarstead have the claw and they're toying with him, his memory begins to fog, and then we get this really, truly strange final diary entry that is dated in the First Era, in which he says that he has become the guardian of Shroudheart Barrow, which sounds rather Sibylline in grandeur. However, I did look into this and I can find no other references in the entirety of the Elder Scrolls universe to a guardian of Shroudheart Barrow. So I don't know if he has been possessed by some ancient spirit that we simply do not know of, or if his mind has just gone a bit bananas and he's made up a little title for himself. I will say though, within the Elder Scrolls Online, Shroudheart Barrow is accessible, and we actually find it occupied by a Nord necromancer named Jackalor. But unlike Wendelius, this warlock, Jackalor, is not here for riches. He's actually attempting to learn the foregone secrets of the Draugr, as so he may, quote-unquote, resurrect his dead wife. And as creepy as that is, there is absolutely no hide nor hair of him being the guardian of Shroudheart Barrow, nor is this title mentioned at all anywhere ever. Not only this, but during the events that transpire within the related quest within the Elder Scrolls Online, we end up killing Jackalor. So we know for a fact that he did not remain here and become the guardian of Shroudheart Barrow. Along with this, the Elder Scrolls Online is set in the Second Era, year 583. So while it does take place about 1,000 years before the Elder Scrolls V Skyrim, even here in the Elder Scrolls Online, Jackalor falls about 2,000 years short of the First Era year 1050 date that Wendelius has written down in his journal. Speaking of which, I also searched the Elder Scrolls timeline and can find nothing of note, nor anything at all around the 1050th year of the First Era. So, this guardian of Shroudheart Barrow business appears to not be a case of possession, and if it is not verifiable by any means, even with the might of the Elder Scrolls lore, history, literature, and games. So it just seems to be some wacky tale of dementia and delusion that Wendelius has cooked up for himself. Now, naturally, with this completely nutty, ghostly, yet not actually a ghost bloke Wendelius hanging around Ivarstead, right around the same period Raider went missing in, well, let's pose the burning question we all have, which is, could Wendelius be the one that killed Raider? Well, let's take a look at this, because even if he didn't, his arrival may have played a part in it. You see, as we mentioned earlier, the Elder Scrolls V Skyrim starts on this date, the 17th of Last Seed, year 201 of the Fourth Era. As we know, Wilhelm says that Raider went missing over a year ago, so the latest date she could have vanished is exactly 1 year prior to when the game starts. And assuming that Wilhelm is using the phrase over a year ago properly, we can surmise that Raider has been missing for less than 2 years. Which means that the earliest date that Raider went missing is 1 year before the latest date she could have gone missing. And yes, I know that sentence sounds jarringly irregular, but it does make sense. Anyway, let's rely on the visuals for this, because the words ain't working. This then gives us a calendar window of 1 year, in which at some point something happened to Raider and she vanished. Now, with all of this in mind, when exactly did Wendelius arrive in Ivarstead? Well, the best we have is the first diary entry, dated on the 200th year of the Fourth Era on the 18th of Morning Star, which, would you look at that, falls right around the middle of the 12-month period in which Rhaegar vanished. So unlike Venaris Vulpin, the vampire we spoke of earlier, the date of Wendelius's arrival in Ivarstead actually implicates him rather than releasing him from suspicion. Might be onto something, but let's take a look at the actual evidence here. When we fight Wendelius, we see that he uses magic in combat, not archery, and he does not use nor own a bow or iron arrows. So those 2 iron arrows that we find with Rhaegar's body, they go unexplained. And just to put a rotten snowberry on top of this crumbling cake, even if Wendelius did kill Rhaegar, then who called for the assassination of Narfi? Things just don't add up. And but Camel, what about the screams? Yes, if you were paying attention to what Wilhelm had to say earlier, then you're probably thinking to yourself, well, what about the screams that Wilhelm heard during the night? Fair question. Let's talk about these supposed screams because there's an issue with them. Just a refression, when explaining to us the arrival of Wendelius in Ivarstead, Wilhelm says this.
About a year or 2 ago, some fella named Wendelius came through. Said he was some kind of a treasure hunter. I warned him not to go in there, just like I warned you. The very next night we heard screams from the barrow, and that was it. We never saw him again.
So Wendelius arrives in Ivarstead, says, I'm going to go into the barrow and get the treasure. And then, according to Wilhelm, the very next night, screams were heard coming from within the barrow. Naturally, straight away, aha! Wendelius killed Rhaegar. We've got a stranger in town, we've got a dead woman Rhaegar, and we have the screaming during the night. It sure seems like the hand that fits the glove. Seems pretty good at face value. But there is a problem, you see, and that is the contents of Wendelius's journal, as he writes down all kinds of mundane stuff. He set up camp, he scared Wilhelm off by rattling some pottery, he spooked the townsfolk, he made a magic potion that makes him look like a ghost, blah 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 blah. But at no point does Wendelius mention seeing Rhaegar, at no point does he mention encountering Rhaegar, at no point does he mention killing Rhaegar, at no point does he mention seeing anyone apart from Wilhelm and the townsfolk that he scared. He didn't kill anyone, he didn't encounter anyone, no one came into the barrow, at no point does he mention himself screaming, nor does he mention anyone else screaming. He doesn't mention fighting anyone, he doesn't mention killing anyone, let alone he does not mention killing Rhaegar. Wendelius does mention that 7 days after his arrival in Ivarstead he managed to scare off Wilhelm by rattling some pots. He does mention that 4 days later he spooked the townsfolk with his ghost potion, but there is nothing written even within the first week of when Wendelius arrived, let alone the day/night after he arrived, which is supposedly when, according to Wilhelm, the screams from the barrow occurred. So why is there no mention of the screams in the journal of the guy who was in the barrow and jotted down every little detail? It just, once again, does not add up. So with that said, I do believe Wendelius to be totally innocent of the murder of Rhaegar. I think he's completely nuts, but I don't think he killed Rhaegar. But now that we're here, let's not take our gaze off of the innkeeper, who seems to be at the center of everything we look at. Why would Wilhelm mention screaming in the night if there weren't any as far as we can tell? Is he lying? Is he misremembering? Is he just wrong? Is he being dramatic and apocryphal? Simply making stuff up and embellishing details for the purposes of a good ghost story? Or is Wilhelm trying to cover something up? Trying to make us connect 2 dots that aren't related? Well, if that is the case, the only reason I can think of is if Wilhelm is hiding something. What if Wilhelm was involved with Rhaegar's death? And to totally divert our attention from him, he tells us that there were screams during the night when the strange man arrived in town. The purpose of this lie is so that we add 2 and 2 together. Girl goes missing over a year ago, Wendelius appears in Ivarstead over a year ago, so they're in the same place at the same time. Then what happens? Screams are heard by Wilhelm during the night, and Rhaegar is never seen again. Not only is Wilhelm telling us that he was absent from the scene of the screams, i.e. he was in the inn, but he is also very subtly serving to us a culprit on a silver platter. Unfortunately for him, according to Wendelius' journal, no such screams ever took place on said night. And if we cannot explain these screams in game, we will just have to explain them as an Easter egg. After all, they are the Wilhelm screams. So what in oblivion is actually going on here? Well, I admit, at face value, Wilhelm is just a friendly and helpful innkeeper. But there are some suspicious facets about him. So now that we're here to deconstruct and psychoanalyze Wilhelm, there is something we should definitely bring into the light. Something rather telling and very odd indeed. So strange, in fact, that it was actually flagged as a bug and removed from the game by the Skyrim unofficial patch. But I am certain that this is not a bug, and for really good reason too, as I will show you in a second. So, during the quest, The Straw That Broke, the one that Nafi gives us to find his missing sister Rada, we discover her skeleton in the river, we retrieve her necklace from her satchel, and then we take it back to Nafi. Upon showing him the necklace, he will say this.
Rada! You saw Rada? Did you tell her Narfi cries? Did you tell her Narfi never said goodbye like mother and father?
A sad yet classically wacky line from Nafi, but get this. Before we take the necklace to Nafi, we can actually stop in at the Villamere Inn and show it to Wilhelm. Whereupon, Wilhelm says this.
Rada, you saw Rada. Did you tell her Narfi cries? Did you tell her Narfi never said goodbye like mother and father?
Weird, right? Wilhelm says literally word for word what Nafi says when you show him Rada's necklace and tell him that she's dead. Why? Well, why indeed? As mentioned, this event is so weird that it was actually flagged as a bug and removed with the unofficial patch. However, I am certain it is not a bug, and there are several reasons for this. One, it's not the same voice actor. Wilhelm and Nafi are voiced by two different people. Nafi is voiced by William Salyers, who does all of the drunk male voices in-game, and Wilhelm is voiced by Michael Gough, who does the majority of the classic male Nord voices that we hear in Skyrim. Now, the reason that's important is because it means that the developers didn't just accidentally add one of Nafi's voice lines to Wilhelm. No. The developers at Bethesda made sure that these two different voice actors, voice acting for two different characters, both voiced and recorded this specific line of dialogue.
Rada! You saw Rada? Did you tell her Narfi cries? Did you tell her Narfi never said goodbye like mother and father?
Rada, you saw Rada. Did you tell her Narfi cries? Did you tell her Narfi never said goodbye like mother and father?
And then intentionally added them to the right characters, along with adding the option to show the necklace to Wilhelm to trigger the line in the first place and type out all the subtitles and so on and so forth. Like, there's a lot of steps in making something like this happen. So someone at BGS went to some purposeful effort to make sure this strange interaction existed. So for once with a BGS game, this is not a bug, but a feature. And one that sheds some light on Wilhelm. As sure, at face value, like, oh, that's weird. But let's sweep face value aside. Why would Wilhelm be repeating that tortured dialogue from Nafi? This is pretty damn odd, right? Well, some say that Rada was a witch, which is totally plausible, as we explored earlier. But the idea here that I read online is that Rada cursed her necklace somehow, and that's why Wilhelm says Nafi's dialogue. As you can probably guess, this does not tickle my fancy at all, because there is no evidence that this necklace is cursed. And also, if we're going to make up a story with no evidence, we can do way better than that. Luckily for you, we do way better than that, and with evidence. So why would Wilhelm say this line? Well, I think that Wilhelm repeats Nafi's tortured dialogue because Wilhelm is suffering from some kind of crushing guilt. He was somehow involved in Rada's death, and he feels bad. He's haunted by it. And on top of this, every single day, the madman Nafi just mopes about town, desperately screaming after his sister Rada over and over. It's a non-stop reminder, constantly refreshing Wilhelm's memory of his devious deeds, actions, and guilt for not only the death of Rhaeda, but also the long-lasting effects it's had on her brother, who, through her disappearance, has been sent down a manic spiral of grief and despair, so steep that he's now nothing more than a drunken beggar living in a ruin alone. Narfi has become a truly sad man, and if this was all caused by the death of Rhaeda, whose doing was Narfi's descent into madness? Well, it would be the person that killed Rhaeda. And who's the person that not only shows some kind of guilt, but delivers a truly strange outburst of adopted lament? That's right, Wilhelm. And why would Wilhelm bear this remorseful sorrow? Because he is guilty in one way or another in regards to Rhaeda's disappearance. So if that is true, what was Wilhelm's part in this? What did he do? What does he know that torments his good conscience so much that when we show him Rhaeda's necklace, he reverts to gibbering and jabbering Narfi's tortured words to us? Well, I've cooked up several theories for you. The first of which involves Wendelius and Shroudheart Barrow, as Rhaeda and Wilhelm may have been working together. You see, there is a strange revelation that rears its head once we clear Shroudheart Barrow by killing Wendelius and then return his journal to Wilhelm and tell him the news. This is the conversation that ensues. Wilhelm, I found this in Shroudheart Barrow.
Let me see that. Can't believe this. It was all just a fabrication of this Wendelius character. Can't believe we were so stupid. Well, least I can do is give you something for taking care of you. If you won't accept it as a payment, consider it a gift.
Then the quest is complete. Wilhelm rewards us done and dusted. But wait, what was the reward for the quest? The Sapphire Dragonclaw? What in oblivion is going on around here? The Sapphire Dragonclaw is what Wendelius came to Ivarstead for. He spent almost 18 months holed up in Shroudheart Barrow and was sent quite literally insane searching for this very item. That what? Wilhelm had the whole time? This thing that he just willy-nilly hands to us for doing a fairly basic quest? I mean, why not just sell it to Wendelius in the first place? He clearly doesn't have much issue parting with it. He just gave it to us, which is weird in itself, but how did Wilhelm get the claw? Did he steal it from under Wendelius's nose? And that's why he was poking around the barrow that night in which Wendelius had to rattle the pottery to scare him off? Or has he had it for longer? Maybe it's a family heirloom, maybe it's totally innocent. Or maybe Wilhelm has plundered the barrow before. In fact, there is very good evidence for this. You know what, let's take a look at that now, as it reveals far more than we expect. And one of the weirdest twists in this tale. For this, we will need to head to the city of Riften, the capital city of the Hold of the Rifts. Once here, we need to make our way to the general goods store, which is called the Pawned Prawn. This is run by Bercy Honeyhands and his wife Dreefa. Now in here, atop the wooden shop front, we can find a note titled An Apology, which reads, Bercy, I got your last request, but there's no way I'm going near Shroudheart Barrow. I know that the trinkets from the Nordic barrows sell quite well, but it isn't worth getting killed. You probably think I'm crazy, but I'm certain that the place is haunted and I refuse to become another victim of whatever lives in there. Sorry, old friend, Wilhelm. Very curious indeed. So Bercy Honeyhands, the shopkeeper here in Riften, has been using or at least asking his friend Wilhelm to go into Shroudheart Barrow and collect ancient Nordic trinkets and artifacts, as so he can sell them at his store. This might explain a few things, as there was something that I noticed in Villemere Inn that annoyed me. Not so much annoyed me, it was annoying that I couldn't figure out its purpose. And that is, behind Wilhelm, there are a bunch of buckets scattered all over the floor. Too many buckets, some might even say. Maybe Wilhelm was using these to carry items out of Shroudheart Barrow to then send them off for Bercy to sell at the Pawned Prawn. While it's not mentioned in the letter, we can assume that Wilhelm gets a cut, if not a substantial cut of the profits, considering he's doing all of the legwork. Totally plausible, but if you do have another explanation for why there's a million buckets behind Wilhelm, please tell me. Thank you. Anyway, from the letter, we learn that Wilhelm refuses to go back into Shroudhearth Barrow as he thinks it's haunted. After Wendelius disappearing and after Wilhelm seeing what he thought was a ghost. But then in the note, Wilhelm says, I refuse to become another victim of whatever lives in there. Now straight away, our minds go to a victim? Oh, well, who's the victim? He must be talking about Raider, and he might be, but I don't think so. As it seems much more likely that Wilhelm is talking about Wendelius when referencing a victim of the Barrow. Because from Wilhelm's point of view, Wendelius went into the Barrow and never came out. Therefore, Wendelius, in Wilhelm's eyes, is a victim of the Barrow. Although it is technically possible, he could be referencing Raider, but as far as we know, she didn't die in the Barrow. But what this letter does tell us is why Wilhelm was potentially knocking around the Barrow that night to gather trinkets to pass on to Bercy to sell, so they could both get money. That's one reason, but it also gives us a potential 200 IQ reason as to why Wilhelm gives us the Sapphire Dragonclaw, but didn't give it to, nor mention it to, Wendelius, as Wendelius openly claims that he was a treasure hunter. Well, if Wilhelm is making money off of the treasure within Shroudhearth Barrow by collecting it, sending it to Bercy, Bercy sells it at the Pawn to Prawn, and then both Bercy and Wilhelm get a cut of the gold. So with that in mind, he obviously wouldn't want Wendelius to have access to its vaults, which requires the Sapphire Dragonclaw to open. So it's actually within Wilhelm's interests to make sure that Wendelius does not get his hands on the Sapphire Dragonclaw, so that he cannot plunder all of the wealth from it. But Wilhelm happily gives the Sapphire Dragonclaw to us.
Well, least I can do is give you something for taking care of him. If you won't accept it as a payment, consider it a gift.
Why? Well, as far as Wilhelm knows, we are not a treasure hunter, but instead we are a capable hero. A capable hero who would be able to go into Shroudhearth Barrow, use the Sapphire Dragonclaw to open up the sealed vaults, go through and kill everything that moves in there and completely clear it of enemies and threats. And sure, we'll likely take some gold and bits and pieces along the way, but what does this leave Wilhelm? Well, it leaves him the perfect business opportunity at his doorstep. We've unlocked the vaults, we've made it completely safe, it's completely enemy-free, and it's filled with all of the loot that we couldn't carry out. AKA, it's an entirely risk-free treasure trove at Wilhelm's front door. And I think that that is why Wilhelm happily hands us the Sapphire Dragonclaw after we proved ourselves in defeating Wendelius. Therefore, he gives it to us knowing we'll go in and clear the place out. But when Wendelius arrived, he said, I am a treasure hunter and I am going into that barrow to get the treasure. Therefore, Wilhelm most certainly did not want Wendelius to get access to the Sapphire Dragonclaw. But this raises the questions. How did Wilhelm get a hold of the Sapphire Dragonclaw? And if you're wondering to yourself, what the hell does this have to do with Raider? Fair question. Well, there is something really weird that I want to show you. As in the Skyrim creation kit, if we look at Shroudhearth Barrow, and specifically the room where Wendelius set up his camp, we can see that on the same table as his journal, sitting right there, is the Sapphire Dragonclaw. Why is it here in the creation kit but it's not in the game? And I did check this. I started a brand new character and used console commands to teleport straight to Shroudhearth Barrow, and at no point does the Sapphire Dragonclaw sit here, where it is in the creation kit, in the game. So was the claw here or not? I'm not sure, but it's pretty dang weird and I don't really have an explanation for it. Other than the devs might have had other plans compared to what we do find here in game. So straight out of the gate, that's weird. But now let's take a look at another theory to do with the Sapphire Dragonclaw, Wilhelm, and Raider. As we know, Narfi lives in what remains of his parents' farmhouse. Well, are we to assume that Raider also lived here? Maybe. From what we know, Raider wasn't just rolling in money either. I mean, she went and collected ingredients. You know, no one says, oh, she was the local blacksmith or something like that. But I will say that in Nafi's house there's one bedroll, and if he's waiting for his sister to get back, then where's her bed? Well, if Rhaeda didn't live at home with Nafi, then she would have lived in the Villamere Inn, as several of the other townsfolk do who don't have their own house. And in Villamere Inn, there are also several beds and bedrolls that are not owned by any one character, but rather they are tagged as being owned by the Ivarstead faction, meaning that yes, Rhaeda living in Villamere Inn, or at least sleeping here, is totally possible and probably more likely than living in that ruin that Nafi lives in. And if she did live here, then it means she would have been around Wilhelm. And if she's around Wilhelm all the time, then Wilhelm might have got a sniff of her magic capabilities. Well, with this in mind, we can thread several weaves that lead to the same place. So if Wilhelm wanted to get the Sapphire Claw out of Shroudhearth Barrow before Wendelius got his hands on it, he'd need to go into the barrow. But what if he hired someone to go and get it for him? Someone he knew from around town. Someone who he knew had some kind of ability to sneak in somewhere, and someone who was probably poor and needed the money. Well, a great potential candidate for this would have been Rhaeda. Not only this, but Rhaeda could have used her alchemy knowledge to make an invisibility potion, which would explain why Wendelius never mentions her in his journal, because he never saw her. Now, just FYI, to back this up a little bit more, there are 6 alchemy ingredients that carry the invisibility effect. You only need 2 of them to make a potion, and Rhaeda had access to 4 of them. Nirnroot, which she has right next to her house and on the island from which she gathered ingredients. Luna Mothwings, which she could have gotten from the same island or from the Alchemist's Shack, both of which are places where Luna Moths spawn during the night. And then there's Ice Wraith Teeth and Vampire Dust. Now, these do not have an apparent source, but they are in the loot pool that Nafi rewards us with, which, as we've established earlier, were of course Rhaeda's ingredients, as it's the only plausible explanation as how Nafi, a poor man who serves no purpose apparently, would have access to these very rare ingredients. So Rhaeda had the knowledge, the ingredients, and the means, and the motive to make a potion of invisibility, which she could have used to sneak into the barrow and out of the barrow with the Sapphire Dragonclaw. Now, we know that nothing happened to Rhaeda within the barrow, as there is no mention of such an event in the Journal of Wendelius. So if something went wrong, it would have been afterwards, once she got back to Wilhelm. So did Wilhelm get the claw from her and then shoot her with arrows and dump her body in the river? Well, it is possible, as behind Villamere Inn, there is a wooden cart that has no apparent purpose. But the back of the inn, where there are no guards patrolling and no one else can see there, well, it's a really good place to meet up with someone, exchange goods, and then kill them. And then, oh, look, this handy wooden cart. Let me lift the body in there, wheel it over to this perfect ledge, and tip her corpse into the river. And get this drop-off point is within the green area that we spoke of earlier when talking about where Rhaeda's body could have entered the water, given the direction the current flows in. So I'm not saying by any means this is what happened, but it is possible and it fits within the rules. And I'm not fully sold on Wilhelm hiring Rhaeda to steal the claw, but again, it is possible. But regardless of whether or not we accept that theory, I do believe that Wilhelm had a much better motive for wanting Rhaeda dead. As we've established and delved deep into, Rhaeda was at the very least an apt alchemist who could have been some kind of witch dealing with a coven and hag-ravens, collecting ingredients, performing rituals, something to do with the magical arts. All of which are things that some people consider witchy. With this in mind, think about this. We have a small town that is apparently down on its luck, which we learn from Wilhelm when he talks about how bad business is.
Certainly isn't helping my business any. Who'd want to rent a room anywhere near a haunted barrow?
The farmer Boaty even describes Ivarstead as a backwards little town.
Pilgrim or not, if I were you, I'd move right through our backwards little town.
Well, backwards little towns with tiny populations that are down on their luck can get dangerously superstitious. especially in this medieval fantasy setting. You know, women are killed for even being suspected of a witch, let alone when they are actually expressing skills in the Kabbalistic arts. And let us not forget that Wendelius says in his journal, and I quote, "These people are far too superstitious for their own good," and talking about the population of Ivarstead. So if someone were to know about Rhaida and her witchy endeavors, well, this could most certainly give a superstitious townsfolk, in their eyes of course, a really good reason to want Rhaida dead. But no one in Ivarstead shows this disdain for all things occult, except for one. That's right, it's Wilhelm. As when we ask him where we can learn more about magic, he will respond with this.
I've got no interest in magic users. No use for their kind at all. They're way up north in Winterhold, and that's fine with me. I don't even like our Jarl having a court wizard.
So Wilhelm openly bears disdain to folk who dabble in the arcane, magical, occult, and mysterious arts. He's got no interest in magic users. He's got no use for their kind at all. He says they're in Winterhold, and he likes the fact that they're nowhere near him, and he's even upset that Riften has a court wizard, that being Willandria, who I believe is one of the trained wizard in the Kabbalistic, particularly for alchemical arts. But we will look into the reason for that later, because that's intertwined in the sheer Gorath rabbit hole that I've mentioned a few times. For now though, we know for certain that Wilhelm could have very well wanted Rhaida dead, just for her proclivities in alchemy and perhaps other magical facets. Now, to take this even further, Wilhelm owns one book. While there are a few books in the guest rooms within the inn, these don't belong to Wilhelm. Again, Wilhelm owns one single book, and it can be found beneath the wooden bar that he stands at. Now, there are 337 readable books and 820 readable pieces of literature within the Elder Scrolls V Skyrim. And which one just so happens to be literally the only book that Wilhelm owns? Herbane's Bestiary, Hagravens. Interesting. It's a book that tells the tale of Herbane killing a Hagraven and a coven of witches. Now, to be clear, Herbane's Bestiary series are helpful guides on how to defeat certain enemies, but there are only 3 of them: Ice Wraiths, Hagravens, and Automatons. So if Wilhelm here did want to read up on how to take out a witch, or whatever he thought Rhaida was, this book here, Herbane's Bestiary, Hagravens, would be the most plausible book for him to have out of all the books in Skyrim. Or maybe he knew about Rhaida visiting the Hagravens at Orphan Rock and thought she was one. Or maybe he's just a silly old superstitious villager who thought the woman mixing potions and wandering off into the wilderness was a Hagraven. Whatever the reason, I find it very, very, very strange that the only person that exudes any sort of guilt about Rhaida's death, as seen when we showed him the necklace...
Rhaida. You saw Rhaida. Did you tell her Narfi cries? Did you tell her Narfi never said goodbye like mother and father?
Is the same guy that has a venomous hatred towards the arcane arts and those who use them.
Sir, I've got no interest in magic users. No use for their kind at all.
And just so happens to only own one book, which is about Hagravens and witch covens. I mean, alarm bells are ringing. Now, let's talk about the iron arrows, as I haven't conveniently forgotten about those pesky suckers. So Rhaida's body is found with 2 iron arrows. So does Wilhelm own a bow or iron arrows? Well, the answer to this is a disappointing and rather confusing no. However, there is something annoyingly strange that you have already seen, although I didn't mention it at the time, so I'd be curious to know which of you spotted this little detail. If we go back to the Pawned Prawn in Riften, the note that Wilhelm sent Bercy has something near it. 2 things, in fact. On either side of Wilhelm's letter are 2 iron arrows. There's not 3 arrows, there's not 1 arrow, there's not 10. They aren't elven arrows, they are not glass arrows, they are not steel arrows. but instead there are 2 iron arrows resting here with Wilhelm's letter. In fact, if we think about the way these 2 iron arrows are placed, they are literally framing Wilhelm's notes. A metaphor perhaps to how these 2 iron arrows have framed Wilhelm. And to make it less coincidental, Bercy does not sell any bows, nor does he sell or own any other types of arrows, nor does he have any other iron arrows. The only 2 archery related things in his shop are these 2 iron arrows that could be anywhere in the shop, anywhere, but they just so happen to be accompanying Wilhelm's letter. Now, I'm not going to say that these are proof of anything, but they sure are curious, especially amidst a sea of theories that all seem to lack iron arrows. But let's entertain this for a moment. Why would these 2 iron arrows be here with Wilhelm's letter? Perhaps Wilhelm ordered 4 of them from Bercy, only used 2, and then sent the other 2 back with his letter. Maybe the 2 iron arrows are Wilhelm's calling card. Maybe it's a subtle hint left by a developer. Maybe it's nothing and just a particularly suspicious coincidence. Or maybe it's a pun. If we follow the arrows will lead to the truth. And if we think about it, the arrows above Raider's corpse, they float east towards Riften. And if we follow those arrows, we technically land at these arrows, which are literally framing a letter from Wilhelm. I don't know if this is some galaxy brain pun that a dev put in here or if it's nothing at all. Anyway, Wilhelm seems like a pretty nice guy at face value, right? He's not mean or cruel or rude, which I think makes it slightly difficult to imagine him organizing Raider's death. But we do have reason to think he would have wanted Raider dead, given his hatred of all occult dabblers, and of course the book he's reading, which is literally about hunting witches and hag ravens. However, besides the suspicious out-of-sight hidden part around the back of the inn, and the 2 iron arrows found in the pawned prawn next to Wilhelm's letter, we don't really have any actual evidence that Wilhelm killed her. But this actually opens a new door, which leads to what I believe to be the most likely theory, one which is much more fun. I think Raider may have been assassinated by the Dark Brotherhood on the request of Wilhelm. It might sound a bit far-fetched, but this requires motive, money, and connections. All things that Wilhelm has, as we're about to learn. But first, let's get a true vibe for who Wilhelm really is, what he's really like, and what he's really up to. If we head to Riften and visit the Blackbriar Meadery, once we enter the premises, we can find a Dunmer brewer who goes by the name of Romlan Dreth, who, by the way, is the descendant of Valen Dreth, that insufferable grey skin who occupies the cell across from you at the beginning of the Elder Scrolls IV Oblivion. Although we can rest easy, as Romlan Dreth is much nicer than his ancestor. Let's have a chat with him. Romlan, my boy, do you work for the Meadery?
Sure. How do you think I'll get my hands on the good stuff and offer it so cheap? You think old Maven is just giving it away to anyone? Good thing she makes so much money. Makes it easier for merchandise like this to fall through the cracks. Nothing but the best. Blackbriar mead, fresh from the vat. Best of all, you don't have to pay the ridiculous prices Maven charges. So what do you say to that?
You're selling cheap meat.
No, Fred. You've got it all wrong. I'm not selling cheap mead. I'm selling good mead for cheap. Blackbriar mead. I'll sell cases of it for half of what the inns and taverns pay for the meadery. All I need is someone to deliver it for me. If anyone saw me leave Riften, they get suspicious.
What kind of delivery?
I need someone to take this small keg of Blackbriar mead to Wilhelm to Vilna Inn in Armstead. Drop it off, and he'll trade you something for the delivery. Keep it as payment for the legwork. Oh, and if you bump into Darren from the meadery, keep your mouth shut. He'd write us out in a second.
Alright, I'll do it.
Good, I'll get going.
Interesting. It seems that Wilhelm has some underground connections and is not adverse to doing some illegal and dodgy black market trading. So let's head back to Ivarstead and deliver Wilhelm this mead. I have a delivery from Romlan.
All right, pipe down.
want the whole blessed place to hear you. The arrangement called for a trade. I hope you'll find this suitable.
Oh, curious. And look what he rewards us with, a gold and emerald circlet. That's definitely something most innkeepers have. Just more riches that Wilhelm just so happens to have. Almost like he's been plundering Nordic tombs, collecting valuables, and making a bunch of money off it. So from this small quest, we can see that Wilhelm is no stranger to secret deals and under-the-table trades, while also being capable of providing valuables as a reward, aka he's got the money to pay for an assassination. That was one of the issues. 750 gold, not everyone's got that to dish out. Well, suddenly we've learnt that Wilhelm does have the gold to dish out. But there is something else that bolsters all of these points, and we need to take a look at it. Have you ever wondered what the deal is with Linley Starsung, the bard who lives and works with Wilhelm at the Villemere Inn? Ever wonder if there is more to her story? Well, if we head back to Riften and make our way to Mistvale Keep, after going up the stairs, instead of going through the front doors, we can actually head down the right, where we can walk down some stairs and enter the Riften Jail, where we will find many fine folk. But we want to have a chat with this guy, Sibby Blackbriar, who is slimier than a sload.
Well, aren't you a sight for sore eyes? I've always got time for lovely ladies.
Ugh, why are you in jail?
Look, we all have our flaws. Mine is that women can't get enough of me. So I had this little affair going on while I was betrothed to a beautiful girl named Svidi. Well, she finds out and she tells her brother Wolfer. Then her brother attacks me with a knife. I mean, I had to defend myself.
So you got arrested for his murder?
Exactly. And now I have to stare at these bars for 8 months. Can you believe it? I was about to let that wench marry into the richest family in Riften, and this is how she repays me. I'd do anything to have that whore's head on a platter. All I need to know is where she is.
Yeah, I'll help you find her.
Ah, that's the spirit. Find her, and I promise you'll be well compensated.
Do you have any information on Svidi?
She was a young woman, buxom, long flowing black hair. She used to sing the most lovely songs to me when we were courting. Never heard a voice so beautiful. All that talent will go to waste when I'm finished with her.
You are serving only 8 months for murder?
Yeah, Mother thought I should be taught a lesson for airing the family's dirty laundry in public. I mean, I've taken care of many people for her in the past. What in oblivion did she expect me to do? Ah, well, at least I have all the comforts of home during my stay. Well, except the touch of a woman, of course.
Tell me about your family.
When speaking of the Blackbriars, only one thought should spring to mind. We are not to be trifled with. Help us, you end up rich. Cross us, and you'll end up a memory. Is that enough information for you? When I find that bitch, I'm gonna wring her little neck.
Jesus, alright, chill bro. So this woman, Speedy, that Sibby was going to marry is quite the hot potato. Where could she be hiding? Well, it turns out that Speedy is actually Linley Starsung, the bard from Villemere Inn.
If you fancy a bit of music, let me know.
Your real name is Speedy, isn't it?
No, I'm sorry. You must have me mistaken for someone else. I've never even heard that name before.
You have nothing to fear from me. You are way too valuable.
I'm sorry, I don't know what you're talking about.
Ah, fine. Gotta use the Intimidate perk. Stop lying or I'll beat it out of you.
Please, I beg you. Don't tell Sibby where I am. He'll kill me. Sibby's been spreading lies about me. You must hear me out.
Please, go ahead. I'm all ears. Tell me your side of the story about Sibby.
Sibby and I were to be married. We were supposed to be happy together forever. Then I found that wretched poetry from Svana. When I confronted Sibby about it, he threatened to kill me. I was scared, so I told my brother Wolfur. He went to talk to Sibby for me and Sibby killed him. My brother wasn't even armed. When I heard what Sibby did, I fled. Now you found me, and you're going to tell him where I am.
Not today, sister. You are way too valuable to this investigation. So, Sfidi fled Riften in fear of the wrath of the Blackbriar family, aka likely death, torture, God knows what. She donned the name Linley Starsong and moved in here at Villamere Inn to live in secret as a bard. That is all well and good, but guess what? Wilhelm is in on it, as in the creation kit we can see Linley's relationships with other characters. She only has 2 relationships with other characters. One is Wilhelm, one is Bercy, both of whom are labeled as a confidant, which, to be clear, means a person with whom one shares a secret or private matter, trusting them not to repeat it to others. So Wilhelm knows who Linley truly is. Not only this, but she has one other confidant, which is Bercy. Bercy, the shopkeeper at the Pawned Prawn that we looked at earlier, the one that works with Wilhelm. Now, if you don't know, Bercy openly and vocally despises the corruption within Riften, as we can overhear himself and his wife Shrifa talking about this.
He's giving and giving, taking and taking. When is it going to end?
What would you have me do, woman? Cross the guild? Take them all on one by one?
You know I don't mean that. We need to find a way out of this. Perhaps Dr. Layla.
Layla is as clueless as she's stupid. No. If anything's to be done about this, we have to deal with it ourselves.
And we can also ask him about it. So what's wrong with Riften?
The question is, what isn't wrong with Riften? This city's corrupt. Rotten to the core. No one cares about anything except themselves. And how much coin they can make off the misery of others.
Maybe you should speak to the authorities.
Authorities? Have you been listening to what I said? They're all dirty. Every one of them. The only way to get things done in this city is to keep your head down and pay off the right people.
So as we can see, Bercy clearly hates all of the corruption that is within Riften. And before we go on, I just want to point out like a little Easter egg I found by accident while looking around his shop for more arrows or bows. And that is on the top shelf, we can find 2 iron daggers that are crossed over each other, which actually generate the image that is on the banner of the Rift. So there's a cool little Easter egg for you that I found along the way. But yes, Bercy hates the corruption within Riften. And what greater force of corruption is there than the Blackbriar family? So given this stance that Bercy has, the fact that both Bercy and Wilhelm are tagged as Linley's confidants, we can deduce that Sfidi/Linley was terrified for her life. Her brother had just been murdered after she found out that her betrothed had been cheating on her. She'd lost the family she'd gained through love, and she'd lost her actual family. So who does she turn to? Well, she turned to Bercy, who openly hates the Blackbriars and openly hates all the corruption. Because of this, he was happy to help Linley escape, probably just as an up-you to the Blackbriar family. And he did this by hooking her up with his best mate, Wilhelm, where she could rather